Good morning. So I want to talk about my favorite games. This is a series I should do a little bit on all my favorite games. It's a series considering how I tend to love and have lots of favorite games. I could probably do this every day for the rest of my life. No, I'm kidding. I don't have that many favorites. And when I say favorites, I mean the go-to, the game I would choose to play if I'm doing a series still. So yesterday I talked about those dark places. Second video, the first video is kind of going over the book, etc. The second video is in a way a cheat sheet, roughly how the game works quickly, and discussing one of my favorite features, which is no leveling, right, for the characters. Today I want to talk about Sword and Wizardry Complete rule book. Now this is the, as you can see, this is the little guy. They've made multiple versions, I believe, of this. This is the third printing. And what's cool about this one, and again, the only other version I had owned of Sword and Wizardry was the PDF. I had the Sword and Wizardry Core PDF way back in the day. I had a Sword and Wizardry, another Sword and Wizardry, and then I had a Sword and Wizardry white box. That was the first foray into the white box, which I believe was Matt Finch's Sword and Wizardry white box, if I remember right. Not fantastic medieval adventure game, which is, I think, a brilliant simplification. But this is the big boy. This is the one that I actually compared to a D&D, but it's really not. It's really a homage to the original game, but it adds a lot of the classes and things that you would see in AD&D. So I thought I would talk about this. So again, my local group, we're using white box because Brian had some experience with that. And when we talked about what do you guys want to do, something different than D&D 5th edition, they didn't want to do Simba Room. They wanted me to run 5th edition version of Simba Room. I declined. Brian is running that for his group. And so the goal was to do an OSR for him. And Brian had experience with Sword and Wizardry Complete. I mean, Sword and Wizardry Continual Light, Basic Fantasy, Sword and Wizardry White Box, or fantastic medieval adventure game. So that was what he recommended, and that's what we're doing. However, if we had been serious about long-term hardcore campaigning, this is the book I would choose without a doubt. Of all of the retro clone OSRs, this to me is set aside, right? Now, again, I love OSE, Old School Essentials, because it reminds me, it is basically the retro clone of Moldvay, which is the game I grew up with. It's the game that I have a special place in my heart for. However, this is what I would run seriously if I had a big local group or just a group that wanted to do this thing for long term. So let's talk about some of the things I like, of course, in this. Now, again, this particular book, third printing, all illustrations done by female artists, which is very cool. So I snatched this. I want to say I got this from, I don't think it was Amazon. It might have been Amazon. I can't remember. But I wanted to support, number one, I did not own the hardback Sword and Wizardry Complete. I had the PDF. So my opportunity to snatch this printing and support a printing that was all female artists was something I had to do. So this is the one I purchased, and this is fantastic. And again, the quality is fantastic. I have yet to really use it, so it's in good shape. I haven't broken the binding. I haven't wrinkled the papers. I haven't stained it with coffee and pizza sauce, none of those things yet. That's the sign that we've enjoyed a game, right? Okay. So what I love about this, again, 3-6 for the most part, he does give an idea of what strength is and what intelligence is and dexterity, etc. He notes the Sword and Wizardry core rule differences in gray box, which is very cool. Special kind of notes from the author. You know, what's the difference between this and core? And core is the one I used originally, way back when. Okay. So again, your attributes are determined, I believe he says 3-6 straight down, but again, I don't worry so much about that because this has assassins, paladins, rangers, druids. So I'm not adverse to letting players roll up their 6, place them where they want them so they can pick the class they want. I mean, that's when I talk about a serious long-term campaign, I want them to be able to try to endeavor to get a character that they can sink their teeth into from the get-go. This, I would make some homebrew tweaks to this, like full hit points to start, that kind of thing, because again, you want to let them, I want players to invest in their character in a serious way out of the gate, which means I'd probably want a single word motivation, and I'd want maybe a single sentence as to what, your character's about. But those are things that I do that are personal things I do as a DM, GM. 3 dice 6 for your character's dexterity score. So you can just roll them. Roll your strength, 3 dice 6 for your strength, 3 dice 6. So he does walk you through, roll 3 dice 6 to do these. What I love is the strength goes from a -2 hit modifier all the way up to a +2 to hit and damage modifier. So again, we stay in that -2 +2 range for strength. Dexterity, fantastic. We get a -1 +1 maximum modifier. So again, I like that we're staying in the -2s, -1s, as opposed to +4s or +3s or +5, whatever. So again, it feels really good, but he does give that strength score to hit and damage. The damage does go as high as +3 if you have an 18 strength. So again, I dig that. There is some sculpting to this. It's not just +3 all the way across the board. Dexterity, of course, affects hit points and missiles. Constitution, easy, -1 +1, and then raised dead survival percentage, which is fantastic. Intelligence, that's going to score our additional languages. It's going to score our maximum spell level, which I love. Again, sculpting how your character as a magic user, depending on his intelligence, might not be as good as Joe's magic user with a higher intelligence score. So we start to see differences between magic users as they level up. Chance to understand a new spell, which I love. It's not just, you don't just take it for granted. You just grab it and write it in your book and you got it. You got to make that roll. And if you don't get it, you're not going to get it, which I dig, right? It starts to sculpt how a character progresses. And then the min-max number of spells per level that can be understood. Then wisdom solely affects the experience modifier for clerics, and I think druids, maybe paladins, but there is no other modifier for wisdom. And charisma, there's no reaction modifier now, which is very cool. It's just the maximum number of people you can hire. And this is one of those things where I of course use when I'm playing like our local game with White Box, if they want to hire a minion, whether it's a backup character, torchbearer, baggage handler, they have to have somebody in the group that can manage this. So of course the worst you're going to have is 1 hireling all the way up to 7 hirelings. So it hasn't become an issue in any of the gaming I've done, but it's one of those things you should pay attention to, that if all of a sudden you've got a group of 5 PCs and they all have a backup character, that means you have, right now, that could be their lone hireling, and then you should be compensating what they're being paid per day to have a backup character. So imagine you've got Bill with a charisma of 10, has up to 4. He's got a backup character he's dragging with him, that he can manage that, but you should be tracking what that backup character costs him as a hireling, right? Because it's not his backup character, it's not his character until his main character dies. But those are things that I like to think about. Again, we have the Assassin's class, which is very cool for those who want to play Assassin. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the Thief or Assassin classes, but that's personal, right? I have no problem with players wanting to background their character as an assassin in a particular guild. I mean, that's if it invests the player in their world and in who they are, what they're about as a character, I'm fine with it. And then we have the cleric, of course, which is fantastic. By the way, these go up to level 21 plus. So again, when I talk about serious long-term campaigning, that's why I mentioned this, as we can get really fat. However, I don't do a lot of high-level gaming. It's rare. It's difficult for parties as a group to get to high-level gaming. The druid, which is fantastic. And again, these all have prime requisites, and some of them have requisites. Like this can be only humans can be druids, which is cool. Again, fantastic class abilities, all that stuff. Their first level spells. The fighter, again, this one of the rules I really love about this particular version is multiple attacks. Of course, we've seen this in mini games. HD 1 or less monsters per level, you get a number of attacks. So we're fighting a bunch of kobolds. I'm level 4. My fighter could get 4 attacks per round against these kobolds. So I could kill 4 kobolds in a round, that's badass, right? It gives the fighter a sense that that's what he's really good at. But this also has a parry ability, which is great. This is a bit of a bug in the game. It says your parry. Fighters with a dexterity score of 14 or better can fight defensive using parry enemy blows. But the parry table, which references the parry rule, is dexterity 15 plus. So the rule states if you have a 14 or better, you can use the parry ability, and this is how and fight defensively. But then the table lists dexterity score of 15 plus. So there's a misprint here. It's supposed to be dexterity of 15 or better, or it should be dexterity score 14 and up. So the two don't jive. So I would stick with the table, because the table is 15, 16, 17, 18. It tells you what your modifier to there to hit is if you fight defensively using parry. So there's a misprint there at 14 or better. If I had a character with 14 and we look at the table, there is no 14 on the table. So that's my argument. And this would be something people might argue about. Well, it says in the book 14. Well, I would have to make sure I've read this and make sure I explain to the party who makes a fighter, if you don't have that 15, you won't be able to fight defensively. And I dig that. I mean, I dig that we have the parry ability here, but there's a little bit of I think, a misprint here. So we do have magic user, of course. Again, 21 plus on that. We have monk, which is another one that a lot of people enjoy having that opportunity. It's not particularly an East Asian monk, so to speak. It can be any type of monk, but generally a bare-fisted fighter type of thing. And then, of course, we have the paladin, which I think in literature is well represented. I have never read literature that features a paladin, so to speak. And it's never quite fit into how I perceive fantasy. However, I have played in a 5th edition table with a couple of players, one of which was playing a paladin, and he brought it to life. And I was in the party with him as a warlock or a wizard, whatever I was in the 5th edition game. And he really made sense of the paladin for me at the table, and it was fantastic. So he brought the paladin to life, which was great. Ranger, this is one of my favorite classes of all time. It suits the fantasy I'm accustomed to. Plus, I really dig the idea of a woodsman who is capable. Again, this one does have spells. However, you're not going to get a spell in the Ranger class until you are level 8, and it would be a 1st level choleric spell. What's interesting is by level 10, you're getting 2 choleric spells, 1 magic user spell, and a 2nd level. So the maximum you're going to have will be some cleric and some magic user at limited levels, which is pretty cool. But you wouldn't get a choleric spell until you already made knight at 8th level. We've got the thief. Again, everybody knows the thief. It does list a thief as a dwarf, elf, half-elf, and halfling. So it gives some special modifiers to their ability to hide, detect traps, etc., which is very cool. So the certain races directly impact the quality of your thief in some ways, which is, again, very cool. Sculpting, right? Again, I talk about serious long-term campaigning with the old school D20 retro clone OSR. I want a game that lets players really sink their teeth into and sculpt their character, even though in many ways you're very similar until you start hitting the higher levels. Character dual classing, taking the vows of a paladin. So they talk about the vows of a paladin. And then we have the choose your race. We have dwarves, elves, half-elves, halflings, humans. Continued advancement, multi-classing in swords and wizardry. And then he talks about multi-classing note. We also have hit dice, the abilities and limitations, saving throws, which is fantastic, experience points, and then multi-classing note 2 and multi-classing note 3. So he gives lots of author notes that's supplemental, again, mostly to help you understand, I think, how it differentiates from core or what the long-term goals are if you want to sculpt the game. Choosing an alignment, again, I believe in alignment. I really like alignment. This, for the most part, has chaos, law, and neutrality. I'm one of those DMs that do not allow chaos aligned characters in a party with lawful characters. So you're either going to all have to be lawful or all neutral, or a mix of lawful neutral, or you can be neutral chaotic party. But I don't allow chaotic PCs to be in a party with lawful PCs. It would go against the grain long term of the party, right? It would just create too many moments of constant consternation between the players and their goals. So, and I generally like chaos to represent the uncivilized or or anti-civilization creatures. Like again, it helps us it helps us realize orcs and goblins and certain creatures are chaotic. They're anti-civilization. They won't be anti-culture. Orcs have a culture. Goblins have a culture. And I think that you have to do that so we can have moments where you communicate with them, or you might even join forces with the goblins to bring down the orc war chief or whatever. So equipment, again, starting gold 3 die 10 times 3 die 6 times 10. has everything, nice fat tables for all your gear. I mean, there's not much overlooked in this very small book. And when I say small book, let's get the total. Not counting the OSR 141, 141 pages. Pretty remarkable. Again, all the artwork, female artists only, fantastic, brilliant. Okay, we've got calculating armor class using a regular system or the alternate system. Again, it has a movement rate based on your weight, indoor, underground, and city movement rates, and then outdoor movement rates. So it has everything. Again, we're not scratching our head going, well, how do we handle this wilderness adventure stuff? Here it is. How to play, gaining experience, saving throws, time. We have turns, we have combat rounds. Combat round is 1 minute. Turns measure normal movement, etc. And again, turns, I believe, are 6 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. But of course, sometimes a referee will rule that an hour passes or a month passes. Again, I love that kind of narrative flavor. You know, you guys have been on the road for a month. You were out of rations, gentlemen. You've been hunting best you can, and you have arrived in a small village. So they know immediately, scratch off those rations. You've been managing somehow to hunt, but we've been on the road a month. And we drop them on their head at a small village wandering out of the wilderness, right? And I won't call it in media res, but we're in it right now, right? And then we have the saving throw categories, which is very cool. Of course, death rays, wands, turn to stone, dragon's breath, spells, and stabs. Okay. Alternate combat box. Again, he has these gray boxes, which are, in a way, author's notes or optional rules. Sword and Wizard uses XP bonus method adapted from the original game because XP bonus system from the original game gets disjointed and even somewhat contradictory, and it's applied to the expanded classes like Rangers, Paladins, and Thieves. So just to be clear, the XP bonus system is not an authentic reproduction of the original rules. So in other words, if you want to go as close to original, you want to pay attention, maybe not use that. Combat, initiative, and order of battle. We have check for surprise, declare spells, determine initiative. So we're going to declare spells before we even roll initiative. We're going to move and missile. We're going to melee and spells. So you're going to determine I'm going to cast sleep. We're going to roll initiative. We're going to see movement and missiles fly. Then we're going to be engaging in melee and magic. So your actual casting of the spell is going to fall in the 5th phase of combat. That's a big deal. We have to decide before we roll initiative, and then you're conjuring, you're waving, you're speaking, you're doing. And then by the 5th, we could have encountered movement, and you might be in melee when you're trying to cast, which is pretty cool. The round is complete. Go back, start at declare spells. So we only roll initiative. I surprise when we first meet. Declare spells, roll initiative, melee, and spell phase. First, all members of the side that won initiative may make hand-to-hand melee attacks if there is in melee range. Let's see, your spells are cast and take effect. Next, the losers of the initiative roll may make their melee and cast their spells. Anyone who is killed by the winners of the initiative roll is already dead. So this is not simultaneous. They cannot attack. That's a huge thing to note, because very often games imply there's a simultaneous effect. I think Moldvay, it's a simultaneous effect. So you may kill the goblin, but he's still going to get his attack on his turn to see if he does any damage or harm to you before he drops dead. This is very, very clear. Initiative is a big deal in that sense. Then if it's simultaneous, winning initiative just lets you go first. Winning initiative in Sword and Wizardry Complete gives you a chance to waylay the opponent and put an end to combat before they can go. Okay, then there's an alternate sequence, which I really do dig. He gives all those options. The core rules of Sword and Wizardry have surprise and distance, which is a Moldvay. I came to recognize Moldvay's distance roll about 40 years ago when Eloy pointed out that basic Moldvay, you had to roll distance when you encountered enemies. And I had never in all of my years rolled distance, and for the life of me, couldn't remember it. And I basically argued with Eloy, dude, that ain't in the Moldvay book. Sure enough, it is. But there's the option, roll that distance, right? I like, again, to put tiers of, you guys are in melee range, you're in short range, you're in medium range, you're in long range. I like using ranges. Of course, in a game like this with maps and minis, you'd want to use feet and or blocks, whatever. Referee determines dexterity for monsters. Now, I'm not ever going to use the Holmes D&D dexterity modifiers for initiative. So the highest dex goes, then the roll up the monster's dex. So I don't mess around with that, because that's a whole nother piece that I have to do in game. So I use a basic initiative check, right? Alternate combat sequence method number 3. So again, you get all the options in one book. How do you want to go about doing this thing? We're using option 1, we're using option 2, we're using option 3. The attack roll, of course, it has the matrix, which is my favorite because, of course, this reminded me of what made D&D mesmerizing. You would look at that attack matrix table and dream the dream to hit armor class 2. They roll the dice and they go, well, I hit armor class 6. And I would say, yeah, roll your damage. You drive your sword. You're driving back the goblin. Roll some damage to affect his hit points. So I love this. But for some reason, the attack matrix when I was a kid just lit up my imagination. I guess it made it game-like, right? You're looking at a game chart, which was, for some reason, it mattered to me as a kid. It looked like a game, right? Not just a textbook. We have a table for the cleric, the druid, the monk attack table. So they have their own attack table. We have the fighter, paladin, and ranger attack table, which was really cool because we have the martial classes and we have the religious type classes. And then, of course, we have the magic user, thief, and assassin class table. And then we have the monster class table. And again, the monsters are just monsters based on their hit die is their level. Attacking from behind. Again, any attack can be made from behind. They don't have to be, let me see here. Any attack from behind has to hit with a +2 or +4 if made by a thief or an assassin. So you can still attack from behind and get a +2, but a thief or an assassin gets that +4. This is something overlooked in many games, right? Can anyone attack from behind? Yes, but the big bonus is coming for those that specialize in it, right? Critical hits, we do have a house rule. Critical hits and fumbles. I don't like critical hits and fumbles. I mean, when you roll a 20 and you roll max damage, you've done a critical hit, right? I roll a 20. Well, that's just for effect. But I roll that 8 on my sword plus my strength. That's 11. That's not say that's 9 points of damage. You did a critical. That's pretty effective. And fumbles. And the reason I don't like the critical hit is because we have to have a measure to balance that, which would be a critical fumble. And I don't like fumbles because it immediately reduces characters to clowns. I don't want to have to clown a character in a serious game, right? I don't mind this for Beer and Pretzel, but when I want to play a serious fantasy long-term campaign, I would like to remove kind of the clowning. Invisible opponents, of course, melee attacks, missile attacks, movement with melee, negotiation and diplomacy, retreating, spacing, second rank. Now, second rank, this is something. Spears and polearms in the second rank of battle formation can attack by reaching through the first rank. Again, why I like this as a serious game is we have this simulation-like effect. So you guys are setting out on the dungeon. You can go 2 abreast, and Bill's a fighter with a shield and a sword, and Steve says, "Dude, I've got a polearm. I'll be behind you." And beside him is the cleric with a shield and a mace, and he's in the second rank with a polearm. He's going to be able to attack even when we're shoulder to shoulder in the passageway. And I like that. I mean, we're going to do this. I like those tactical advantages, right? If I'm going to play this kind of game, I want some of that tactical stuff, and it matters, right? It becomes very fun. Spells, subdual damage, terrain features, 2 weapon fighting, and 2-handed weapons. Now, this is interesting because, again, many of these games overlook it, or they just give it, 2-handed fighting. Just as shields improve your armor class by 1, fighting 2-handed grants a +1 to damage rolls. Right? Let's see here. And fighting with a weapon in each hand gives you a +1 to hit, but you won't get you don't get 2 separate attacks, right? Note that fighting with 2 weapons does not allow 2 attacks, but gives you a +1 to hit. So I'm gaining a chance to find purchase with a second weapon. Sword is drawing your defense, daggers coming into your ribs. That would be the +1, right? So I dig that. 2-handed weapon is weight, right? If you do strike, it's gonna put some wear and tear on your opponent. Unarmed combat grappling rules, right? Non-neutral clerics, that's in here. That's kind of an interesting thing here. However, that's because turn undead is not under cleric. It is actually in the combat rules is turning. So cleric's turn undead is found in the combat section of the game, turning undead. Damage and death. When a character is hit, the amount of damage is deducted from the hit points. When the total hit points reach 0, the character is unconscious. And if his hit points are brought down to -1 or lower, he dies. And I love this rule, right? 0, you're unconscious. You're not dead. But anything negative, you're dead. -1 or more, you're dead. So you could have a character at 0 just drop out unconscious. That is a neat effect, and it's simple to adjudicate. And we don't get into counting rounds before you bleed out. We don't get into going to negative half your hit points before you die. None of that nonsense. 0, if you're lucky enough to go to 0, you just fall out unconscious. There's a chance for you. But -1 or more, you're dead. And I dig that. And that's very simple. We still keep the lethality right on it. Healing, in addition to various magical means of restoring a hit point, characters recover naturally at the rate of 1 point per day of uninterrupted rest. So again, 1 hit point per day of uninterrupted rest. So very often we count this as an 8-hour overnight rest. No, it should be a 24-hour uninterrupted rest. 4 weeks of rest will return a character with full hit points, right? So this would be back at an end. This is why it's so important when you find a village, you find a place to stay, and you announce that you want to stay for a day in your room and just heal. That's why finding a village with an inn or a tavern is so important, not just narratively to talking to NPCs and to meeting people, etc., but becomes the place that you're guaranteed your 24 hours of rest with no interruption. And that makes getting a room at the inn important game-wise. Morale, the quick method for ascending combat. And then we have the gameplay example, which are always fun to read those, depending on the author. Traps and loot. And then we have a high-level adventuring and the stronghold. We have hiring followers. Again, great art. Again, all the illustrations done by female artists, which is really cool. Magic, entire page dedicated to magic, right? So lots of good stuff in the reading of this particular. And then our list of spells goes all the way up to level 9. And then we have the descriptions of the spells. We also have, of course, our cleric, our monk, our druid, all draw from these 2 spell lists, I believe. I don't know if it has. I'm trying to see. Can't recall whether this also had special for druid. I don't think so. I think they draw from the magic user. Yeah, so all cleric and magic user spells classes draw from those 2 lists. The referee, so then we have rules are just the guidelines. There's not a rule for everything. When in doubt, make a ruling. Right? That is why all of us fell in love with the D&D D20 back in the day, right? Rules are guidelines. When in doubt, make a ruling. There are just not enough rules to cover everything. So, be fair, try to be, consistent. My biggest issue with GMs is consistency. 1 week we're rolling surprise, the next week we're not rolling surprise, or whatever. So consistency is all I ask for, right? Are we going to roll under for all attribute checks? Cool. Then I don't have to wonder if we're doing it that way right next time. Designing the adventure, and then it's got a whole section on designing adventures. Again, a great little sample dungeon here, which is awesome. And then we get into all of our adventure rules, which are wandering monsters in the dungeon, the map key, dungeon monster list, and then, of course, wilderness adventures, getting lost, encounters in the wilderness charts. Fantastic list of charts, special combat rules, mass combat, units of troops, etc. So we do have that if we ever get there, we ever want to do siege combat, etc. I love the fact that they're in here. Aerial combat, ship combat, ramming, grappling, and then we have the remainder of the book, for the most part, is monsters and treasure. And what's interesting here is not a ton of illustrations, but we get the description of the monsters' stat blocks, and then we get the monsters listed in alphabetical order, nice and clean. Right there is one monster, super clean, and one simple little description at the bottom for anything untoward. And then once in a while, we get a very cool original illustration, but not every monster is illustrated, and that's fine by me. Illustrate the monsters that are somewhat rare or unique. That's what I want to see. I don't really need a skeleton illustrated, for instance. I think we all can picture what a skeleton warrior looks like. Dragons, there's this illustration for the dragon, the Afridi, right? The gnoll, the ghoul actually has an illustration, which is fascinating. The goblin has an illustration. Again, don't necessarily need to see those. Hobgoblin, one of my favorite enemies. Human bandits, love it. Then we got the lycanthropes, the lion, the kobolds, right? Kobolds are a 1d4 HP, so their hit dice is literally a half a hit die. So again, this is a perfect example of a fighter level 4 would get 4 attacks against the kobolds, right? Orc is 1 hit die, so again, fighters level 3 would get 3 attacks against orcs. So they become those mass enemies that you wade through as you travel through the deep dungeons of what the heck is that dungeon in Lord of the Rings, right? How, my God, I only read it every few years. I read the trilogy. I can't remember the name of anyway, when you come across all of those goblins and orcs. And then we got monsters by challenge level. So this is interesting. So again, he includes a CL so you can understand how not to overwhelm a certain party of characters. And I don't worry about this. I play by the guidelines. And I pretty much understand an HD level 1 monster. HD 1 monster is equivalent to a level 1 hero to some degree, a couple of those creatures. But if you're creating a dungeon and you're thinking about the levels of depth and how difficult the game gets, it's nice to know, you know, we're on level 5 here. We might want to make sure we mix this up a little bit. I personally believe if you wander into a cave with a cave bear, and you're 2 first level thieves, and you wander off into a cave bear's lair, and you can't get away, then you're just going to face down it's going to probably be a TPK, as the cave bear will rout you, right? So again, you're not guaranteed balanced encounters in my sessions generally. And then treasure, we have a fully dedicated treasure list, and that leads to magic items, and of course armors and cursed items, unusual weapons, and then of course remarkable magic items, and then of course descriptions of miscellaneous items and charts. And then we get into using deck of cards, of course, the cursed items, how that would work, and their descriptions. Then our character sheet, which I love, one of the better character sheets I have seen in the retro clone. I love this character sheet. I've got printed off here about 50 character sheets, as I had anticipated on running long-term campaigns with my local group. But again, right now we're doing white box. They might decide to go with this as it gets a lot more in depth as we move on. We may just transfer their white box characters into this. Legal appendix, which is our OGL, and then our index in the back, and then a blank page. And there it is, Sword and Wizardry, third printing, complete rule book, Frog God games. And again, they may even have a 4th, 5th, 6th, but I have no clue. This has been in storage with some of my more valuable books. I keep these in a waterproof storage, and I just got this out when we started thinking about how we're going to do our local games, and it's been sitting on the bookshelf here, and I thought it's time to go through some of my favorite games. So I want to go through that. I've talked about Those Dark Places. I have yet to play it, but it's already one of my favorite games. For a sci-fi game, it's right up my alley for what that's about. And then, of course, Dark Age of Man goes without saying. It is the game that Dell and I have written and developed, and I absolutely love Dark Age of Man, of course. But again, I'm biased, and it's hard not to love your own creations, so to speak, right? But they give you a different experience, right? So if you want the D20 D&D semi-simulation style of game, you don't use Dark Age of Man. And if you want it to be character focused and wide open, naive narrator, you're going to want something like Dark Age of Man, etc. So anyway, and there's those very cool character sheets, right? Very cool. So there you have it, folks. Sword and Wizardry Complete. And it does, for me, when I first saw Sword and Wizardry Complete, it reminded me of AD&D, but it's really not. It's the original D&D with some added stuff, some tweaks, so to speak. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.